Greetings, Disney adults, Disney fans of all ages, and welcome. Hey, I want to do a little reminiscing, if I could. When I was growing up, my family, of course, made many trips to Disney World. Typically, we would stay at the Fort Wilderness campgrounds in one of the cabins there, and it would be me, my mom and dad, and my sister. Now, here was a typical day for us when we were at Disney, and especially through my formative years, Epcot Center wasn't open, so all we had was the Magic Kingdom. So we would wake up in the morning, we'd eat a little bit of breakfast, and then we would go down to the dock at Fort Wilderness, and usually we would board a launch to go to the Contemporary Resort. Why not get on a cruiser to get over to the Magic Kingdom faster? Two reasons. One, the launches would go to the resorts while the cruiser would typically go to the Magic Kingdom. Cruiser was bigger. We kind of liked the close-knit feel of the launches. We just preferred riding the launch to the cruiser. But the second reason is part of what we're talking about today. We would go to the Contemporary Resort. We would get off the launch there at the boat dock. We'd go into the Contemporary, right up to the 4th floor on an escalator, and we would board the monorail. The monorail would then take us around to the Magic Kingdom. By the time we got to the Magic Kingdom, we're standing outside waiting to get in the gate, but for my sister and I, we'd already ridden two rides. We'd ridden a boat ride, and we'd ridden the monorail. And I want to talk about the monorail today. The monorail is just a very, very cool mode of transportation that you find at Disney World. But we want to ask the question, what would Walt think of the monorail at Disney World? Now, I know this is a little different from the direction I usually go. I tend to avoid talking about things that Walt would have known, and he would have known the monorail at Disneyland. But the monorail at Disney World was actually a little bit different than the monorail that Walt dreamed up at Disneyland. So I want to ask the question, what would Walt think of the Disney World monorail? Before we can answer that, we have to take a little trip and go back in time.
And here comes the Disneyland Alweg monorail coach for its first official run, pulling up to the loading platform where the dedication ceremonies will take place, and the ribbon across the track will be officially clipped. Everyone here on the loading platform, dignitaries, celebrities, and special guests are cheering as the monorail pulls in. And now, there is Vice President Nixon waiting. This is your spot, Walt. Take it away.
To open the first operative monorail system in America, it is our good fortune to have our friend and fellow Californian, the Vice President of the United States, Mr. Richard Nixon, and his charming family, Mrs. Pat Nixon, Julia, and Patricia, his daughters. Mr. Nixon, our Vice President.
Well, thank you very much, Walt. I want to say that this has really been one of the most exciting and interesting days that I've ever had in my life.
Go right up there. And let her go. Well, turn a little bit on the side. Hey.
That was from the official dedication and grand opening of the Disneyland monorail in 1959. And yes, that was Richard Nixon, Vice President of the United States. Regardless of your feelings about Richard Nixon, the fact is the Vice President of the United States came to the dedication ceremony of an attraction at a theme park. That's pretty cool. Now, the story of Disneyland's monorail actually goes back about a little over a year. In 1958, Walt was on a family trip to Germany. They were traveling through Cologne, Germany, and the story goes that as they were driving down the road, they rounded the bend and they saw a monorail train going by overhead. Walt was immediately fascinated by it. A light bulb went off in his head, and it just so happened that they were on the grounds of the Alweg Research Development Company, who were the designers for the monorail. So Walt immediately talked to the Alweg company and asked for help with designing and planning it, and with the Disney Imagineers, they created the Disneyland Monorail. Now, the Disneyland Monorail of 1959 simply traveled around Tomorrowland. It was an attraction. Now, a couple of years later, in 1961, the monorail line was expanded and they added a stop at the Disneyland Hotel. Now, in the process, the trains were changed and they went from the Mark I trains of the original monorail system to the Mark II trains. They were updated again several years later in 1969. When Imagineers were planning Disney World, one of the things they were really paying attention to was one of Walt's biggest frustrations with Disneyland. Walt had never liked the urban sprawl that sprang up literally right outside of the park, so Imagineers wanted to make sure that they avoided that. The way they did this was they created Magic Kingdom, and then they put the Ticket and Transportation Center, which is where parking would be, in a completely different location. And they were separated by the Seven Seas Lagoon. So, you park your car, you go to the TTC, and you board either a ferry boat or the monorail to get over to the Magic Kingdom. It was a very clever idea and a very clever use of the monorail technology. The monorail had gone from being just an attraction in the park to being an actual mode of transportation, a way to get around the parks. In fact, if you ride the monorail at Disney World, you're not inside any of the parks. You're outside of the parks. Cool. Now again, for my sister and I, even though it was outside of the parks, we still considered it a really cool ride. So this is what Imagineers did when they created the Magic Kingdom and ultimately Disney World. There are 3 monorail lines at Disney World. There's of course the resort monorail. That's the one my family and I would take. It goes from the Ticket and Transportation Center to the Polynesian Resort, the Grand Floridian, that was added when the Grand Floridian opened, to the Magic Kingdom, to the Contemporary, and then back to the Ticket and Transportation Center. You can also take an express monorail with stops at the Magic Kingdom and the Ticket and Transportation Center. Still go past the hotels, but you don't stop at them. And then a third line was added in 1982 with the opening of Epcot Center. Now you do have to transfer to get from one monorail to the Epcot Center monorail, but that is the third line that is open. Now there are 12 trains now that service these 3 lines, all of them identified by their colors: black, pink, blue, teal, orange, etc. and etc. Now when Disney World opened, it was the Mark IV monorails in 1971. These were replaced in 1989 by the Mark VI monorail. Now the Mark VI had better technology, improved air conditioning, but something else the Mark VI had: standing room. They had spaces where guests could stand. Now it certainly increased capacity, but the Mark IV monorail that I grew up with as a boy, you could only sit in. You could not stand in them. But, like I said, 1989, the monorails were changed over so that they could carry passengers who were standing. So that is the monorail system that we have today at Disney World. So what would Walt think? Well, the simple answer, Walt would be thrilled, I believe, that the monorail system is used in such a way. See, in Walt's original dream for Epcot Center, the two main modes of transportation that there would have been at Epcot would have been the people mover and the monorail. Remember, cars were not really part of Walt's dream for Epcot. So I think Walt would be thrilled that the monorail system is now being used to transport guests from one place to another. Now, if there were anything that Walt, I think, would not be happy with, one is I wonder if Walt would say, why didn't we add more monorail trains? Now, I know the short answer, why isn't there a monorail train, say, to Hollywood or to Animal Kingdom, is simply cost. It is very cost prohibitive. It is very expensive to add a monorail line. Now, it's very appropriate for Epcot. I imagine Imagineers said, we don't have to do that for Hollywood Studios or for Animal Kingdom. And certainly the Skyliner is a much less expensive alternative, and it still gets us from Hollywood Studios to various resorts and to Epcot. But I think Walt would question, why didn't you add another monorail train? I also think Walt would question, why do we have places to stand? The original monorail trains, no standing. You had to sit to travel. With the addition of the standing option, the monorail becomes a little bit more like a subway or a train, and less a unique experience at Disney World, in my opinion. You may disagree, and that's perfectly okay. But I would argue that I don't like the fact that you can stand on the monorail now. I don't like the idea that they're trying to pack as many people into the monorail. It makes it feel, I don't know, less magical somehow. I don't know. What do you think Walt would think? I do fully believe that he would love how the monorail is being used as a transportation system. Not convinced he would like that people are allowed to stand on the monorail. But Walt was also a businessman. He might also say, well, I understand why we have to do it. So, what do you think? You think Walt would like the monorails as they're being used? You think Walt, what do you think of the fact that we only have the monorails between Magic Kingdom, Epcot, and Transportation and Ticket Center? Should the Disney company have added a line to Hollywood Studios or even to Animal Kingdom? Let me know what you think, and I appreciate you watching this video. Leave a like for it, leave a comment, subscribe to this channel, and give me some ideas. What do you think I should talk about in a future video? What would Walt think of? Fill in the blank. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at Disney World very soon.